The Rockets and Knicks were in Game 5 when O.J. started that fateful drive. His four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the juice was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla. I'm a killer. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Crossed the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. I've traveled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Oversight Live. I am Ben Carpenter. We're going to have an exciting show tonight. Lots going on in this state. You may be wondering what Oversight Live is. Well, Oversight Live is new. It's we've been on the air here for a couple of weeks. Alaska's state capitol and legislature is only accessible by plane and ferry, and it's prohibitively expensive for most Alaskans for both time and money to get to Juneau to visit with our legislature and government offices. And it certainly is not going to happen on a regular basis. So providing oversight of our elected representatives is a greater challenge for Alaskans than it is for most Americans. So Oversight Live is your road to Juneau until one can be built. A lack of a road is a major inconvenience for Alaskans, but it's no longer a valid excuse for not knowing what's going on. Due to technology, we can bring you convenient and relevant content so that you can be informed with the truth and educated, and you don't have to go through a liberal media bias to get your news. You will have to deal with my bias, and I'm unabashedly a limited government, fiscal, and social conservative. You have the opportunity to engage with me too. If you have questions or comments during this live show, then just chat them there in your window on YouTube, and they'll come right to me, and I'll do my best to answer the questions. If you're listening to the recording and you have questions, drop me an email at producer@oversightlive.com, and I'll do my best to answer your questions on air. Listen, if you've got a good question, it means somebody else probably has a similar question, and don't be surprised if I use your question online, during the show to edify everyone listening. Look, some of this can get dry. We're talking about government and politics and dollars and cents sometimes, but we're going to try to do our best to have fun. So, without further ado, let's get started. What two topics are we going to talk about tonight? Well, the spring forecast came out from Department of Revenue, and I think we should chat about that. There are some implications there for this legislative session, obviously. Another thing is one of the bills that got read across the floor recently, was introduced to the legislature, is a repeal of the resolution asking for a convention of states. And I think we need to dive into that as well. So we're going to try to get both of those subjects talked about in this hour, and both are important. So I don't have a meeting to show you tonight, but I do have documents to show you. So I'm going to share my screen. First, we're going to jump over to the spring forecast. This is easy to find. You can follow along if you want. There we go. All right. Make it a little bit bigger here. Okay, that should be. So you can see up in well, you probably can't see it. There you can. No, you can't. Okay, this is Alaska Department of Revenue tax division. You can find this document by going to tax.alaska.gov. And maybe I can back out of this 1 second. Here's the website. I guess slow down just a little bit and show you where to find it. All right. This is the website, tax.alaska.gov. Right down here in the annual reports is the revenue forecast spring 2026. So you click on that and it comes up with the forecast. Now I'll make it a little bigger here so you can see it. All right. Here's your executive summary to Governor Dunleavy. All right, let's dive in here. Unrestricted general fund revenue is forecast to be $6.5 billion in fiscal year 2026. That's our current fiscal year. And $6.7 billion in fiscal year 27. So that's $2 million. Get my numbers right here. That's $200 million more in revenue from current year to next year. Okay. So where's that revenue coming from? That'd be a first question we should be asking. All right. Single largest component of unrestricted revenue. Unrestricted revenue is the revenue that we get to, that we can spend any way that we want. If it's restricted revenue, then it's got rules that says it can only be spent in certain ways. And that's usually federal dollars, certain federal dollars. Okay. Unrestricted revenue. The single largest component of unrestricted revenue is not oil. It is percent of market value, POMV, transfer from the permanent fund. That is $3.8 billion for fiscal year 26 and estimated to be $4 billion for fiscal year 27. Okay, so there's another $200 million more from this year to next year that the legislature is going to have. Look at that. Where it didn't come out of anywhere other than permanent fund earnings. That's it. So we're spending, we will have $200 million more to spend because our investment earnings are giving it to us. It's not oil. It's not the economy. It is the world economy. It is the investment earnings of the permanent fund. Okay. Unrestricted revenue from all other sources, including oil and gas, is forecast to be $2.7 billion. Okay. So that's of your total unrestricted. And I'll show you a chart here that breaks this down. It'll be easier to see. So 2.7 billion in fiscal year 26. And would you look at that? 2.7 billion in fiscal year 27. So our economic engine, all sources other than permanent fund earnings, is little over 2.5 billion, 2.7 billion this year and next year. So we're not forecasting that we're going to see much of an increase in our private economy. Okay, so what's driving this private economy? So for some perspective, fiscal year 25, Alaska North Slope oil production averaged 468 barrels a day. That production is expected to average 459,000 barrels. Did I say 468 barrels a day? Yeah, that's not good. So 468,000 barrels per day is what it was in 2025. 2026 is supposed to average 459,000 and 518,000 and a half for fiscal year 27. So the current budget that we're working on, fiscal year 27, we're projecting that we will have less oil through the pipeline than we did in previous, 518 is greater than 459. So we will see an increase in barrels of oil for fiscal year 27. It was a decline from 25 to 26, but an increase from fiscal year 26 to fiscal year 27. All right. I hope that I haven't confused you and lost you. And if you're reading along, you're catching it where I'm misspeaking here. All right. Before increasing over 600,000 barrels per day in fiscal year 2032. Okay. So we should see more oil on the horizon in the future. The reason for that is because you're going to have Pika project coming online later this spring, and then first production from the Willow project in fiscal year 29. So those two projects come online and start producing, and we see additional revenue to the state because of that. Okay. Okay, so now there's a situation going on over in Iran, right? So in terms of oil prices, this forecast is being released during a period of historically high uncertainty given the conflict in Iran and certain disruptions to oil markets. At this point, it is looking like the state may receive a temporary windfall from higher prices for the remainder of fiscal year 26. So that ends at the end of June. And for fiscal year 27, which we haven't passed a budget for yet. The revenue forecast is based on Alaska North Slope oil prices averaging $75.26 per barrel for the remainder of fiscal year 26, which incorporates an actual average price of $67.34 per barrel for the first 8 months and an average price of $91.09 per barrel in the final months of this year. Okay. So we're recognizing that the price is going to be higher. Price of oil is going up and will be higher for the remainder of this current fiscal year. The price forecast for fiscal year 27 that they're using is going to be $75 per barrel. And that assumes that prices in fiscal year 27 will be over $80 a barrel and decline throughout the fiscal year. Okay, so it's just a projection. It's a guess. Over the longer term, prices are assumed to average $69 to $70 for your out years, fiscal year 28 through 33. And they're templating, they're forecasting that it'll rise to $75 by 2036. The oil price forecast is based on futures markets through fiscal year 33, followed by an assumption that prices will increase with inflation thereafter. All right. So it's a scientific wild ass guess, a swag. Compared to DOR, Department of Revenue's fall 2025 revenue forecast. So that's not this year's budget, but last year's budget, which was released in December. The ANS oil price forecast increased by $9.77 per barrel for fiscal year 26 and $13 per barrel fiscal year 27. The ANS Alaska North Slope oil production forecast increased by 2,000 barrels per day for fiscal year 26 and increased by 700 barrels per day for fiscal year 27. And that's driven by the revised outlook for oil price and production. And so what is that the unrestricted general fund revenue forecast increased by $545 million for this current budget year, fiscal year 26, and $510 million for fiscal year 27. Pause here and ask if anybody remembers the size of the supplemental budget that they passed for fiscal year 26. It was roughly a $500 million budget. Fiscal year 26 has $545 million more than we were forecasting from the fall forecast last November or December. Okay, so Department of Revenue's wanting us to note forecast represents one scenario in a range of potential outcomes. It's a scientific wild ass guess. This is true now more than ever, given current world events, and oil prices over the next year could be materially higher or lower than the official forecast. For example, for the current budget that we're working on, fiscal year 27, while the price forecast is for $75 per barrel, there's a 10% chance that oil prices could average $130 or more instead of $75, and a 10% chance that they could average $45 or lower. So this is the uncertainty. The range should speak to the uncertainty that's possible. Like we all know that we can't predict exactly what the prices are going to be, but this is where we think 10% chance that you could have extremes on either end of that, right? So it's a swag. Okay, so there's some additional forecast. So on your table of contents, you can click on these to go look at specific sections. I'm going to scroll down here to our revenue summary, and I'm going to share some of this and then go to a chart. Okay. So Department of Revenue is saying that the state of Alaska received an estimated total of $19 billion in revenue in fiscal year 25. And that is from all sources. Okay. So that's including federal dollars. This total revenue consists of two components: unrestricted general funds and restricted general funds. So they're saying here that the unrestricted general funds are things that we get to appropriate, that our legislature, the state legislature, gets to appropriate. In fiscal year 25, and it is key here too, unrestricted revenue is typically the primary focus of budget discussions. That is an incredible statement, okay? Because the supplemental budget that was just passed is called a $500 million supplemental. But it's actually well over $1 trillion because the restricted revenue that's coming in from the federal dollars, we didn't even talk about that. See how that works? You got a $500 million budget. That's what we call it. That's what the public sees. And there's no awareness that another over $500 million was received from federal dollars. Okay. The supplemental budget was well over $1 trillion. I'm sorry. Well over $1 billion, not $1 trillion. I'm excited tonight. My tongue is getting twisted here. All right, so I'm just some context here to show you that this is a true statement. Unrestricted revenue is pretty much all we talk about, but it isn't what's all that's important, because people do need to know how much money we're receiving from federal dollars. If there's $500 million coming in from the feds, and I'm summarizing that number, then a quarter of that number is debt. 25% of it is debt, meaning your kids and your grandkids will owe money on that. It was added to the federal debt. So the roads that money is going to go to, that's why we had to have a $70 million match of state money, of unrestricted general funds to match to get money from the feds. Well, that money from the feds is debt, and we're going into debt at the federal level to repave our roads. In fiscal year 25, unrestricted revenues totaled $6.3 billion. Okay. $19 billion is all in. That's all sources. 6.3 was unrestricted. Okay, if you take out the transfers from the permanent fund, so you take out your investment earnings, unrestricted revenue from all other sources in 25 was $2.7 billion. Unrestricted revenue are forecasted to be $6.5 billion for 26, fiscal year 26, and $6.7 billion for fiscal year 27. Okay. The spring 2026 forecast, that's this forecast, reflects an increase in expected unrestricted revenues compared to the fall forecast in all fiscal years in this 10-year forecast period. For fiscal year 26, projected unrestricted revenue from all sources has increased by $545 million. For fiscal year 27, projected unrestricted revenue has increased $510 million. Increased projected revenue is primarily a function of significant higher oil price forecast. As discussed later, this oil price forecast is subject to uncertainty and represents one possible path. All right. Let's go. I'm going to come back to investment revenue. I want to show you this chart here real quick. Scroll down. This is total revenue by state. Total state revenue. Okay, so here's a chart showing it. It's going to show similar numbers that we just talked about, but it's in chart form, okay? So on the right-hand side here, you see fiscal year 25 column on the left, current year, fiscal year 26 in the center, and then next year's budget that we're currently working on. This is a projection, and it is fiscal year 27 on the right. Okay. So investment revenue, this is permanent fund earnings and all of the other investments that is done, like the constitutional budget reserve and higher education fund and power cost equalization fund, all of that. Okay. So all of our investment revenue for last year was, and the way to read this is 3.793 billion. Okay. 3.7 billion. Current year, 3.9. So there was an increase from last year to this year, and then 4 billion for next year. Okay. Investment revenue. Now, I want to point something out at this point. Because this isn't just permanent fund earnings, it's kind of skewed because there's additional monies being invested. But think of this in terms of a 5% market value draw. That's what we've been using from the permanent fund. And the permanent fund is much larger than the other funds. So power cost equalization has $1 or $2 billion in it. Higher education fund, about $1 billion. CBR's got $3 billion, I think. But the investment, those are invested differently than the permanent fund is. It's got different strategies. So CBR does not return a very high return because we don't invest it very well. We need to keep it more liquid. Okay. So think of this in terms of a 5% market value. 5% of whatever the size of the permanent fund is how much you're going to draw in investment earnings. Okay. So our 5% of the fund that was in fiscal year 25 gave us some fraction of $3.7 billion. A 5% draw next year is going to give us some fraction of $4 billion. Okay, so it's not exactly 4.07 because there are other investments in there, but I wanted to show you the scale here. When the fund gets to, and fiscal year 27 is going to be probably 90 some $billion. The permanent fund itself total will be $90 billion. 5% of that gives us $4 billion, or a fraction of that, okay? A large fraction of that. When your permanent fund is $100 billion, a 5% draw gives you $5 billion. So when the permanent fund corporation says our goal is to get the permanent fund to $100 billion for state spending, this is the dollar they're talking about. This dollar here, this figure here, is going to be somewhere around $5 billion. Okay? So that's the goal right now for the Permanent Fund Corporation and many in the legislature, is to get that fund growing and as big as it can, $100 billion as soon as possible. Then we've got $5 billion here. Okay. Petroleum revenue. It's been pulling teeth to get new wells drilled on the North Slope. Well, we've got Pika and Willow that came online in the last couple of years, or that have been allowed to go forward and will be coming online in the next couple of years. Okay. So that's why we're templating that we're going to have more oil revenue. But that has been a long battle with the federal government over the last decade to even get to this point. Right. So that's why you don't see a large increase in this petroleum revenue number. $1.9 billion. It used to be that our state budget, our all of the revenue that we're getting, the majority of it is all coming from this dollar figure, from this figure right here. $1.9 billion out of a $6.3 billion budget last year. Only $1.9 billion of it was oil revenue. Current year, $1.8 billion. And projected that we'll have $1.8 billion for fiscal year 27, the current budget that we're working on. Okay. Now, here's the kicker. The state of Alaska has an economy that isn't just oil. There are other things, other activities that are going on in the state of Alaska. Fishing, mining, all of the other, wherever you work, all of the other things that go on in our economy. That's what we consider non-petroleum revenue. So fish taxes are in there. Road taxes are in there. When you go buy a gallon of gas and there's 9-cent charge for state tax, that goes into this. Okay. So this is a measure. This whole unrestricted unrestricted general fund revenue is kind of a snapshot, a picture of the state economy. It's not entirely accurate because it doesn't have federal dollars in it, but work with me here. From the budget's perspective, from the budget maker's perspective, the legislature's perspective, this is our economy. Investment revenue, petroleum revenue, and then this small other. I mean, it's not super small. It's $600 million. But that portion of the economy that's not oil related is not anything compared to oil or compared to the investment earnings when you're looking at it from where our money is coming from a state budgeting perspective. Okay. It's a small other. That amount is templated to grow slightly over the it has been growing. It grew slightly from last year to this year, and then it's templated to grow slightly the next year. Okay. All right. So that's where our revenue is coming from. Big picture. Okay. Why do we have two different columns here? Oh, so this is restricted revenue. Sorry. So I was talking about the revenue that you can't spend, that the legislature just kind of passes through and it doesn't appropriate. It's restricted for certain purposes. So your investment income with regard to the money that is restricted and we don't discuss. Last year was $258 million investment dollars. They're earmarked for something else. 244 for current budget year and 171 for next year. Petroleum revenue. Some of that revenue is restricted and we don't talk about it. It's already earmarked for something. Okay. And there's the dollar figures. 115 last year, 103 million this year, and 130 million the following year. Non-petroleum revenue, 493 last year, 454 million this year, and 450 next year. So roughly about the same. So they've got, that's designated general fund. Okay, so, okay, so now I understand what they're saying here. Designated general fund revenue and then other restricted general fund. So as you're probably aware, maybe you're not, the Constitution says that we cannot dedicate funds. Okay, so this is kind of misleading. This portion is kind of misleading right here. You're going to love this. Designated general fund is a statute that says $1 comes in for a particular purpose and comes in from a particular source and then it goes to a purpose. Okay. The Constitution says we can't do that. We can't do it. It's prohibited. That's called a dedication of funds. So what we do is we call it a designated fund instead of a dedicated fund. Okay. So the nuance here is that if we wanted to ignore the statute or change the statute, we would be able to do that. Okay. So I misspoke earlier. Restricted revenue is revenue that the budgeters say is money that we don't talk about and we can't change. Okay. Because it's already got a purpose. That is only the case for federal dollars. Down here, federal revenue. Federal revenue comes in with strings attached and it tells us where that money is going to go. For designated funds, we most definitely could do something different. There would be consequences to it because there's a state law that says, hey, this money is supposed to go there. But from the legislature's point of view, from the power of the legislature, the power of the purse, it would be no different than the legislature deciding that the permanent fund dividend needs to be smaller this year or bigger next year. there's a statute that tells the legislature how much to spend on the permanent fund dividend, and we choose to ignore that. If there's a statute that tells us how much of this investment revenue is supposed to go to education spending, for example, the legislature could choose to ignore it. Because the Constitution prohibits, unless it is in the Constitution, unless the dedicated fund is in the Constitution, the statute does not have to be followed by the legislature. It can choose not to follow it. For example, permanent fund dividend is one that we choose not to follow. So this is misleading, in my opinion, to say it is I should say that it is misleading to say that this $800 million that is a total revenue within your designated general fund can't be reappropriated by the legislature. That would be incorrect. They can do that if they choose to. Okay, so there's some other restricted revenue. Let's get down here to the federal receipts, because this really tells the story. So $6.9 billion is what we received from the federal government last year, 7.1 this year, and we're projecting 6.1 billion next year. Okay. So total unrestricted general fund revenue, what we're calling unrestricted, 6.4 billion this current year, with 7.1 billion additional dollars coming in from the federal government. So we have more federal dollars flowing into the state than we do state money from our own economy or investment earnings, however you want to put it. Okay. 7.1 billion compared to 6.4. I guess it would be fairly close and accurate if you added in your total designated funds, your $800 million that we say we can't appropriate differently, that we don't talk about. Then you're looking at about the same. Just easy math. Okay. So big picture, what I'm showing here is we're receiving about as many federal dollars coming into the state this current year as we are state money coming into the state. That's how dependent we are on federal dollars. Okay. Now, sorry about that. I'm still getting over this cold. When you consider federal revenue and state revenue together, all of your dollars, this current year is a $20 billion budget. We're projecting that next year is going to be a $16 billion budget. Total state revenue, all in. All right. What I want to show you is something that the legislature is working on with regard to this investment dollar figure right up here. Okay. So let me jump over to a different screen. Let's try that one. Okay. This is in Senate. This is a bill in Senate Finance, Senate Bill 274. The short title of this is Permanent Fund POMV Available for Appropriation. Okay. So this is changing a statute. It's an act relating to the computation of the amount available for appropriation from the Alaska Permanent Fund. The last meeting was yesterday, right here. Let me make this bigger so you can see. Sorry. The last meeting was yesterday. We can go look and listen to it there, or you can go to KTOO's website and find that meeting, okay? The text here is right here. All right. So what this does, what the legislature and the Senate Finance is wanting to do is it's wanting to reduce that 5% POMV, percent of market value. It's wanting to reduce it over the years. So they're going to repeal and reenact this statute. This statute currently says 5% is going to be drawn from the permanent fund. This is by statute, okay? It's not constitutionally protected. It's a statute that technically the legislature can ignore. $2029, they would drop that percentage from 5% to 4.9, and it would come down every year 1/10 of a percentage point, okay? Until 2033, it would be 4.5%. So what the Senate Finance Committee is telegraphing that they would like to do is move from a 5% market value draw to a 4.5% market value draw. Okay. So now let's go back to that other slide that we were just looking at. Okay. So what that means effectively is that this number, when you go from a 5% draw to a 4.9% draw, this number right here gets smaller. Your 4 billion gets smaller because you're not going to be drawing as much. The reason that the Senate Finance Committee is wanting to do this is because the Permanent Fund Corporation goal is for our investment earnings to be 5% plus CPI. Okay, so inflation, CPI, Consumer Price Index, plus 5%. Long-term, inflation's, the figure is 2.5%. Okay, so if you add long-term inflation of 2.5% plus your 5% goal, your total goal investment target is 7.5%, and we haven't been hitting that. Our investments have not been doing good enough to keep up to meet the target over the last few years. Now, if you look longer term and you measure from the beginning of the permanent fund, then long term, we will make 7.5%. We'll make that target. Like long term, it's 8%. But in the short term, and there will be years, our own consultants in the Permanent Fund Corporation will say this, that there's just slightly less than a 50% chance that every year we will meet that target of 7.5%. So here's the problem that you have. If we're drawing $4 billion out of the fund, but we're not earning $4 billion, then it eats into the fund balance. This is the problem that we're going to face when you consider rolling the earnings reserve account in to the fund, to the permanent fund, combining the earnings reserve account and the fund, but you continue drawing 5% out. And in the years where you have high inflation and low returns, and you want to draw 5% and you didn't earn 5%, then you're going to be forced to draw it from the corpus of the fund, from the principal of the fund. So now the Senate says, okay, well, maybe 5% is too much. Let's drop it to 4.5%, and we'll do that over 5 years. Or how many other years it ends up being if the bill passes, right? Because it can still be amended. The point that I'm getting to here, and this is where if you're following along with what this means, if the government can, if we don't forecast and we don't increase the economic engine here enough in these two categories, our petroleum revenue and our non-petroleum revenue, but you decrease the amount that you have coming out of the permanent fund, then you have less money every year to spend. Okay. So right off the bat, you might say, hey, great, that's fine. We don't really want our government to continue spending and increasing spending anyway. Okay. But what that really means is that all of the pressure of the services that the state is going to demand that continues to be funded, all of that is going to be push the permanent fund dividend right out the door. So effectively, if the legislature picks up the bill that's going to move the 5% POMV to a 4.5% POMV, it will eat up the permanent fund dividend, assuming that you do not see a commensurate, an equal amount of increase in the petroleum revenue. And that's not even counting if we have a larger appetite and want to spend more on defined benefits or on defined contributions or on education or capital budgets, whatever the appetite is for the legislature. If it wants to spend more in the next 5 years, but we're drawing less from the earnings reserve, from the earnings reserve, but from the permanent fund earnings, then you won't have as much money for the dividend. That's what they will say. We just don't have enough money anymore to pay the dividend. So it'll go away. I look at this and I say, from my perspective, I look at that bill in Senate Finance and I say, that is the death of the dividend. Guarantee it. All you're going to do is reduce this amount from the permanent fund earnings, and you won't have enough to compete with for the dividend. All of the other state spending will be more of a priority for legislature than paying the dividend. Now, the thing that could be the saving grace here, and I haven't seen a chart. Excuse me. The saving grace here, and what could make a liar out of me, or at least show me that I didn't have my facts, is if the investment earnings in the fund grow enough to make up for the reduction in the draw. So if you draw 4.9% instead of 5%, but you made enough in your investment earnings, then you made the same amount as the reduction, then it would be a wash. It would be net zero, right? So potentially, if the investment earnings continue to increase, like for example, this year we had $200 million more in fiscal year 26 than we had, we had $200 million more in fiscal year 27 than we did in fiscal year 26, then that will be a wash. If you came down a same amount with a percentage. Okay. So that's a chart or a comparison that I haven't seen, and that could be true as well. So theoretically, your investment at the same time as you're reducing your POMV draw, but your investment earnings are increasing, it could be a wash. I'm saying theoretically because I haven't seen the numbers. Okay. So now we're gonna see what the legislature does in the current fiscal year. Now that we're expecting, I almost did it again. There's a little red button down here. That button is not what you want to push while you're on a live show, because that ends it. That's what happened. I was on Michael Dukes yesterday and his show, and I meant to share my screen and click the little red button and cut myself off. I almost did that again. I need to figure out some way to put a little flip switch on there like pilots do. Maybe a post-it note. Don't push this button. Anyway, so we've got additional permanent fund revenue this year, this current budget year, and we're templating that there's additional oil money coming in. So the question will be, what are we going to spend that on? Okay, I am ready to jump to Convention of States, but I want to check in with you all real quick. Let me see here. The forecast doesn't include an estimate of permanent fund investment return. Yes, it does. That's what this investment revenue is. And I just said that the 4.078 billion is investment permanent fund earnings plus earnings from the CBR, the higher education fund, the permanent power cost equalization fund, which are all quite a bit less than the permanent fund earnings. So I haven't looked through the entire forecast here. Let me just go back up here real quick to we might have let's see if there is what you're looking for. General fund. I'm looking for investment forecast or something. Nope, it doesn't have a table that is specifically about investments. And that's something that you would get from the permanent fund anyway. Yeah. I don't see. Restricted revenue, unrestricted general fund revenue by type and source. Yeah, 2.2 is what we already looked at, I think. Okay, maybe this has it in it. This will be interesting for you. Okay, we'll pause. We'll come back to this here because you probably want to see this. And I can say, go to the website. You can look it up yourself too. Investment revenue, permanent fund. Okay. So I said before that $4 billion, a large fraction of it was permanent fund earnings. This is what you're looking for. Okay. There's $3.9 billion, $3.99 billion in investment revenue from the permanent fund. Then other investments, $81 million. So that's all of the other funds that we have is $81 million. So obviously the lion's share of that total figure for investment earnings is all permanent fund dollars. Okay. So then our unrestricted revenue, petroleum property tax, petroleum corporate income tax, oil and gas production tax, there's the dollar figures broken out for those. Royalties that come into the state, you've got categories for mineral bonuses and rents, oil and gas royalties, interest, NPRA royalties, so that's the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska royalties, rents and bonuses. Unrestricted non-petroleum revenue. Okay, so this is that small other, the part of the economy that isn't the oil economy. Alcoholic beverages for this current budget year, I say the budget that they're working on, you're looking at $18 million. Cigarette tax, $13 million. Other tobacco products, 11. Electric and telephone cooperative, 200,000. Insurance, premium tax, 90 million. Marijuana, your cannabis, $6 million to the state. And notice that is unrestricted. I hear this all the time. Hey, that marijuana tax, wasn't that supposed to go to education? This is listed under not restricted. Restricted would be your dedicated fund, so that you have this money and by statute it's supposed to go to education. It's not classified under that. It's classified under unrestricted. So there's no designated fund there. You got a tire fee, $1 million off a tire fee every year. Okay, corporate income taxes, $275 million. Fisheries tax, the business tax, $19 million. Fisheries resource landing tax, $4 million. So your fishing industry's a total of $24 million to the state budget. We get $2 million off charitable gaming, large passenger vessel, gambling, $34 million. And other tax, binding tax, is $102 million. So that's a total of $580 million for the current budget that we're working on of what I call the small other part of our economy. This is if you instituted a personal income tax or a sales tax, it would be in this category right here, unrestricted non-petroleum revenue. That's where you would see it. Okay. So this is measuring, in the way that I look at this, this is measuring where we're taking money, where the legislature is taking money out of the private economy to pay for state government. Okay. As a comparison from the previous chart, you can see where the legislature cares more about. The larger dollar figure, the permanent fund earnings, that's what we're focused on. That's what the legislature is focused on. We're not focused on this. And don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing that the legislature needs to be looking at how they can squeeze more money out of this. What I'm suggesting is, how could we raise this money through the things we do in the legislature to help grow this? For example, if there's more people, if there's a growing economy, you're going to see more alcoholic beverages purchased. For example, that was maybe a bad example. More fishing, for example. I don't know. The road tax is the one that I was looking for. Where's the road tax? Tire fee. Motor vehicle permits. There's the, why am I not seeing the road tax? The gasoline tax is what I'm looking for. Anyway, the point is, when you see more people in tourism, gambling, for example, this dollar figure would go up. So how do we get more people into the state to gamble? The legislature would if that dollar figure, if $34 million mattered to the budget, we would be looking at that and saying, hey, how do we increase this activity so that we get more money? But that's not what our focus is. We're not focused on growing the economy in order to get more state revenue. We're focused on permanent fund earnings. Okay, folks, I want to jump over to this other concept. Oh, you know what? I'm looking at this and I'm not sharing it. All you're doing is staring at my face. I'm so sorry. It's making sense to me because I've got two screens in front of my face. Bear with me. I'm sorry. All right, guys. This is what I was just showing you. When you scroll down to the unrestricted general fund revenue by type and source, it will show you where the dollar figures are coming from, the taxes, the types of taxes that we have in this. I feel like a doofus here. So again, for the last year, this year, and projected for the following year is what it's showing, what each one of these taxes is going to get you, okay? Or get the legislature. All right. Sorry about that. This is going to be unrestricted general funds, continued. I'm looking for the I don't see it here. Maybe it's in restricted. Yeah, maybe it's restricted. Where is it? So there's the charge that we get that we pay at the pump, and I don't see it there. Maybe it's lumped into one of the others, petroleum revenue of some sort. I don't see it here. Anyway, I think the takeaway here that you can see is that the state government, our state government, is focused largely on where the money is coming from and that source of money. Permanent fund earnings, a little bit of oil, and an even smaller amount local economy. Okay. And then all of that combined is the size of the federal dollars that are flowing in. Okay. Lisa says the state needs to not rely on the feds for everything and start being realistic on spending. I don't disagree with you, Lisa, but think about what you're saying. Let me personalize it for us, okay? Let's say that we make $80,000 a year in our job. To make it a round number, we could say $100,000. Let's say you make $100,000 a year. And then something comes along and you got to now live on $50,000 a year. You live on half your pay. That would cause a significant emotional event in your life. Like, very few, if any, people who make $100,000 a year live and have a lifestyle of $50,000 a year. Most everybody that makes $100,000 a year spends $100,000 a year, or right up close to it. I think you'd probably be hard pressed to find people that make $100,000 actually save 10% of that and don't spend it. There's probably a number out there, but not many. And I'm not talking about the 401k that comes out of your pay. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm saying your disposable income. You set aside. You make a choice to set aside 10% of it or some percentage and put it into savings. Very few people are actually doing that. So the state would have to say, we're going to do with 50% less revenue to the state if we were to not have federal dollars flowing in. Now, that's not realistic. So you could take the federal dollars and say, cut them in half. So that's still a 25% decrease in revenue for the state of Alaska. It's not general fund revenue necessarily. And technically speaking, if some of that's requiring matching funds, then you would have a little bit more of our matching funds that weren't necessary because there wasn't federal dollars coming in. It'd free up that money. But still, that would be 25% less of things that are being funded right now by the feds that we would have to pick up the tab for. You can see how just that concept would cause major consternation in the legislature. Not only the legislature, but the rest of the economy. How many jobs are dependent on those federal dollars flowing in? How many people's paychecks are dependent on those dollar figures flowing in from the federal government? You would say, healthcare industry, road maintenance, road construction. Those would be two heavily hit sectors of our economy that would feel the brunt of that. I'd love to see a reduction in federal spending. And this is one of the things why I feel like I'm a broken record and I'm banging my head against the wall, because I don't think most Alaskans are ready to have this conversation. I want to show something to you because this is the bigger issue that we have. Goes to the bigger problem. Okay, I'm going to share this. Probably seen this before. I know we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic, but work with me here for a second. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury. with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. And this is from an 18th century, 1700s century Scottish historian and lawyer, Alexander Fraser Tytler. We are in a situation in our, and this is why I say no, there aren't enough Americans that want to hear this message. There aren't enough Alaskans that want to hear this message. The number of tax dollars, federal tax dollars, income tax dollars that we pay as Alaskans, and that goes to the federal IRS, and then Congress appropriates money back to us, right? That's what we just looked at in this spring forecast, that dollar figure that's the same as our economic engine, right? Those dollars flowing back in don't equal the tax dollars that we're sending out. They're greater. We're a net positive recipient of federal dollars in the state of Alaska. There's a number of states that are. And then conversely, there are a number of states that are the exact opposite. They're paying way more in federal taxes. Their people are, corporate and personal income taxes, than what their state receives in federal taxes. And this is what our congressional argument was against Alaska statehood, was that there were legislators at the time in Congress who felt that if Alaska was granted statehood, it would be a burden on the other states of the Union. We are a net positive recipient, meaning other states are subsidizing our lifestyle in Alaska. Other taxpayers in other states, not all of them, the state, especially the states who are not a net positive recipient, they're a net negative recipient, meaning they pay more in income tax, federal tax, than they do receive in federal benefits. Of course, like some of that money that they're paying is coming over to us because we aren't paying our own way. So now you're going to have a conversation at the federal level about reducing spending. And what does that mean in the state of Alaska? It means we're disproportionately hurt versus other states that don't receive as much federal dollars per capita. They pay more federal taxes than they receive in federal taxes. And so a reduction in spending means a reduction in needing tax money, right? And so they benefit. We are the ones that get hurt because our budget and our people have become accustomed to having all of this, what do they call it? Largesse from the public treasury to ourselves. Our roads are being maintained by the public treasury, the largesse of the federal treasury. To the extent that we have a little bit of federal dollars flowing into our schools, it's largesse from the public treasury. So this is the larger problem that we have to start educating people in the state of Alaska and across this country. You demand spending, and to make matters even worse, you knew I was going to go here. To make matters even worse, we're a net positive recipient of federal dollars. And those federal dollars aren't even dollars that we've paid in taxes, human beings that are alive. No state is paid for. A quarter of the dollars we receive, a quarter of all the dollars the federal government pays out, that's all debt. It is what future generations who aren't even born yet. I mean, Americans who are born today are born into well over $100,000 in debt as their share, their per capita share of the national debt. This historian says that history says that democracies, even if we're a representative republic, we're doing exactly what's being warned about here. The democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy because you run yourself into a cliff or off a cliff. And that's where we're headed at the federal level if we don't stop spending the way that we're spending. We're going into a debt, $1 trillion every year. And our interest payment is $1 trillion every year. We spend more on interest than we do on national defense. This is not sustainable. Okay, this is where we're going to go from here. Stop sharing this. And now I want to jump to I'm going to go to Wikipedia first, cautiously. All right. Let me make this as big as I can for you. So this is a record, and I think it's fairly accurate because it's references the resolutions and the year in which they were approved by the legislatures. Okay. So if this is not current, I'll take the blame, but I will point to Wikipedia as my source here cautiously. All right, so this is state applications for an Article 5 convention, and I'll define that here in a minute. But I want you to see why states think it's necessary in their language for their own legislatures passing the resolutions calling for an Article 5 convention. Okay, so just bear with me for a second. This is the pain or the impetus, the reason why people think in other states, why they think we need to call for a Constitution convention. Okay, Kansas in 2026 says we need to have an article convention for term limits. Kansas that was in March. In January, Kansas says we need fiscal restraints, limiting terms of office, federal officers, including members of Congress. South Carolina in January of 26 says a balanced federal budget. Texas in May of 25, let's get together and have a constitutional convention so that we can institute fiscal restraint on our federal government, limiting the terms of office of federal officials, including members of Congress. South Carolina in 2025, term limits. Indiana, 2025, term limits. South Dakota, term limits, same year. North Carolina, term limits. Louisiana, term limits. Tennessee, term limits. This is 2024. Florida, prohibit Congress from making any federal law applying to the general public that does not equally apply to U.S. representatives and senators. Florida, grant to President of the United States line item veto authority. Florida, term limits. Florida, balanced budget. California, regulation of firearms. Raising age to 21. I'm not sure what the raising age to 21 is. That firearms? I don't have to check on that. That seems the only liberal ask, and it's coming from California. Oklahoma, term limits. Missouri, term limits. South Carolina, fiscal restraint, term limits. You see in the picture here? Oh, I guess I should back off here and share with you real quick what Alaska did. To my understanding, we were the second state to recently pass a constitutional convention, Article 5 constitutional convention request. And we're down here a ways. It was 2016. Here's Alaska. April of 2016, countermand amendment. It's a countermand amendment. Well, it would allow states to propose initiatives that would repeal any federal statute, executive order, judicial decision, or regulatory decision if 3/5 of the state legislatures approved. So this is the states looking at states' rights and saying, we're tired of a federal government, and that's all of you, legislature, executive, judicial, of this federal encroachment in our lives. And if this would be a constitutional amendment, that's what they would want to have this countermand argument would be. We want the power of the state legislatures that as long as 3/5 of our state legislatures agreed on the same thing, we would override and nullify and countermand any federal law, any federal executive order, any federal judicial decision, any of our regulatory decisions get made. That's what Alaska wanted to see a constitutional convention for. Interestingly enough, that is at risk now. Here is Representative Schraggy's HJR 41 that was just right across the floor. It's got a hearing on March 18th. So that's this coming Wednesday. This is to rescind the request for a constitutional convention. So you got all these states that are their legislatures are saying we call upon Congress to pass a constitutional convention. I think it's 34 states have got to call it or request it, and then Congress has to call this constitutional convention. Okay? We don't have 34 states that have done it yet. Representative Schraggy from Anchorage believes that the state of Alaska should rescind our request for a constitutional convention. Evidently, he thinks that we no longer want to have a remand conversation about nullifying federal laws and federal overreach. So I would argue you can look at the full text here and see exactly what his argument is, but he doesn't really present an argument. He just says we're going to repeal it. He doesn't justify it in any means. There's no justification here. It just says we recognize that we asked for it, and now we want it to be nullified, rescinded, nullified, and suspended upon passage of this resolution. There's your meeting scheduled for March 18th, 1 p.m. I would be looking really hard if you're interested in a constitutional convention. I'd be looking really hard for the public testimony that should be offered at some point in time. If it's not, it's probably not going to be at this meeting, but it might. I don't know when public testimony. I'd have to check the record, the calendar to see if public testimony has been noticed here. How do you find that? So you go home, you go daily schedule. We said it was the 18th, right? March 13th is the last that they have here. So let's go through the 18th. Let's just make it the 18th through the 18th, and that'll make it easier. All right, so meetings that have been noticed for the 18th. House Judiciary. Yep, public testimony has been noticed. So they're going to take public testimony on the 18th. And if nobody calls in, or if only the invited testimony says, yeah, we need to rescind this, then that's what they're going to use as an argument. So everybody who thinks that we ought to have a constitutional convention needs to be calling in at the House Judiciary Committee on March 18th at 1 p.m. to notify them that they need to cease and desist in this resolution. Again, it's a resolution, so it does not go to the governor. He has no ability to veto this. All it takes is a majority vote from the House and a majority vote from the Senate, and it's done. What's at stake? Make this a little bigger here. Okay. 2.8 million petitions from citizens across the country have said they want to see a Article 5 convention. That's about 2% of the MAGA voters that voted for Trump. Okay, let's see if I can quickly go to the page that I wanted to show you here. Not resources. Oh, maybe it is here. Maybe, come on, mouse. Okay, I'm going down a rabbit hole. I want the... I'm trying to find the map of the states that have already, to show you which states have already done this. So it's supposed to be in the resources. Oh, you guys, I'm sorry. This is not going well for me right now. Okay, there's lots of people that have endorsed this. Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, Charlie Kirk, Caroline Leavitt, Governor Braun of Indiana, Heritage Foundation, President, Governor Huckabee, Mark Levin, Kirk Cameron. There's a reason why I'm scrolling down here. Governor DeSantis, Ramaswamy, Simone Gold, Rand Paul. Oh, look at that. Governor Mike Dunleavy has endorsed the Article 5 convention as well. Okay, that's why I wanted to show you. This is annoying because I know I was just on this page and I said, you know what, you need to hold that page open so you don't lose your spot. Nope. Oh my gosh. I wish this was easier to find, guys. I'm just going to have to give up. There is a chart here somewhere that will show you where the maybe it was this one. Nope, that's the old article. There was a chart here that shows you a map of all of the states that have already signed on, and that's what I'm trying to find, but I'm having problems. Just chalk it up to not having my ducks in a row on this one. Anyway, so Convention of States. Let's stop this, and I want to see if I can get this other. Okay, audio. Okay. This was a pretty good explanation for those that are unfamiliar with the Convention of States.
The movement for a Convention of States is picking up across the country. The goal is to amend
Tell me if you can't hear
through a convention
this.
of state legislatures rather than Congress. The idea is to give power back to the states and to the people. World's Emma Eicher has the story.
In January this year, the Kansas House of Representatives passed a resolution to join the Convention of States. It's the 20th state so far.
We are calling for a convention of states to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for members of Congress and federal officials.
A convention of states is an alternative way to pass constitutional amendments. The concept relies on Article 5 of the Constitution, which allows either Congress to pass amendments or 34 state legislatures can apply to Congress to call a constitutional convention. The group Convention of States Action is spearheading the movement. Billy Norp is the Idaho director.
Article 5 of the Constitution allows two different ways for an amendment to be proposed to the Constitution. If you can get 2/3 of the states to sign or to pass exactly the same resolution that calls for a convention of states, then a convention of states would be called.
The organization wants a convention of states in response to expanding federal power. Norp says one item on the agenda for a possible amendment is term limits on Congress.
Many of the senators and representatives have spent their whole lives in Congress. Our founders never intended it would be a lifetime job to be a senator or representative for the country.
Another priority is the nation's $38 trillion of national debt, a number that ticks higher every second. Dan Foreman is a Republican Idaho state senator.
We're on a collision course with financial destruction, so we need to do something.
The U.S. has never held an Article 5 Convention of States. The closest historical parallel is the 1787 Constitutional Convention. There, state delegates took the opportunity to write the Constitution as we know it today. It's the best example of states convening to place guardrails on federal power.
They gave us Article 5 as part of the Constitution. They wouldn't have done that if they hadn't envisioned someday that we would need to use it. And we do need to use it.
Last year, Idaho legislators tried to pass a resolution to join the convention and met strong pushback. Idaho is a deep red state, but there isn't a united front on this issue within the Republican Party. Idaho is a microcosm of challenges the convention faces in other Republican-led chambers, where disagreement stretches across both sides of the aisle.
Some of the concerns are legitimate. They're voiced by patriotic citizens that are genuinely afraid of a convention.
Foreman says the biggest pushback against the convention is that it could go beyond its intended scope. Opponents worry that a so-called runaway convention might result in radical political agendas being pushed all the way through to a constitutional amendment. Another concern is that Americans aren't united enough to produce meaningful change. But Director Billy Norp says the ratification of amendments is a strict process.
The convention can only propose, not ratify, and nothing becomes part of the Constitution unless 38 states ratify it.
State delegates at the convention must also stick to a predetermined agenda with penalties in place if they exceed it. But legal scholars are uncertain whether those restrictions would actually be enforced.
The states determine the agenda. The states select and instruct and limit their delegates. The states retain enforcement power. They can recall, replace, and penalize their delegates that go.
14 states will consider passing a resolution on the Convention of States this year, and 7 states have already passed the resolution in one chamber, but not the other. Here's Senator Foreman again.
I think the American people today are of the same bloodline that the founding fathers were. I think we're equal to them in every way because we're Americans and because we do care about our country. And I think we'll rise to the challenge and do just as good a job as they did.
Foreman says he's optimistic that more legislatures will join the movement, making the states a substantial force in the bid to check the federal government's power. Reporting for World, I'm Emma Eicher.
Okay, so I thought that was a pretty good introduction. If you don't know, it's not even a very good introduction. It's just a good introduction to the conversation, I guess. Doesn't really tell you much about a constitutional convention. So a constitutional convention, and Christopher says that if they do that, the PFD can be put in it and keep the state hands off the PFD. So that is if you have a constitutional convention at the state level. This organization in an Article 5 constitutional convention is at the federal level. That's what this Convention of States website is. You just go to conventionofstates.com and you can do your own research here. If you Google Convention of States or Article 5 Convention, there's going to be lots written about this on the pros and the cons, Lisa, if you want to do some research on it. Every 10 years, the state of Alaska, and this is tied to our census, every 10 years on the ballot we're asked the question, do you want to have a constitutional convention? The state always says no. Population overwhelmingly says no. The purpose of calling a constitutional convention for the state of Alaska would be to propose amendments to the Constitution. The legislature can amend the Constitution, but we cannot, as members of the public, we cannot do a citizens initiative to amend the Constitution. The only way the citizens can amend the Constitution is by calling for a constitutional convention every 10 years. Okay, so that is something that we consistently say no to. At the federal level, our federal Constitution, Article 5, gives us the right, it gives state legislatures the right to demand the federal government, to demand Congress call a federal USA nationwide constitutional convention for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. It isn't amending the Constitution. The convention does not amend the Constitution. It proposes amendments. Whatever amendments would be ratified or approved, passed at that convention would then have to go to the states, and 38 of the 50 states would have to approve them in their legislature before that. And I think it's the legislature, or maybe it's an up or down vote of the people, but I think it's the legislature would have to, no, it is the legislature, would have to approve that constitutional amendment before it would become effective at the federal government. So the risk here is that people say, well, if we take a look at the makeup of our states, and I would just juxtapose this against this demand for federal spending and how much our larger population is relying on federal government, right? And the roll of the dice here is that there's more people that would want to see crazy stuff happen at a constitutional convention than are term limits and fiscal responsibility, balanced budget amendments. Okay, that's the fear. The fear is they'll come away from the convention with a constitutional amendment that takes away the right to bear arms, or constrains our freedom of speech, or something like that. And I think from the right's perspective, that's maybe what they're afraid of. And then from the left's perspective, you'd come away with a constitutional amendment that bans abortion, for example. Okay, so both sides of the aisle are saying, heck no, we don't want a constitutional convention because we've got our social issues, or our things that we hold dear that we don't trust. We fear that a constitutional convention would run away and deal with those types of things. It wouldn't just be limited to the things that you see on the Wikipedia list that state legislatures are saying is the reason they're saying they want a constitutional convention: term limits, balanced budget. The fear is you could do any of that. Now, the argument that the Convention of States will make is if the call for the convention is limited to those two things, balanced budget amendment and a term limit amendment, then that's all that the convention would be able to do. That's their argument. I say, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? Do you think that in 100 years, between now and when your grandkids' kids are our age, or adults, that Congress is going to pass an amendment calling for constitutional for term limits? How about a balanced budget? Do you think the U.S. House of Representatives and our U.S. Senate are ever going to require themselves to balance the budget? They're not even passing a budget right now. They haven't passed a budget since the 90s. They keep passing continuing resolutions. Our Congress isn't even doing budgets. Do you think that they're going to pass a constitutional amendment that would require them to have spending discipline? Are sitting members going to voluntarily put term limits on themselves? What would have to happen with the makeup of our population? What was the percentage of, let me see here if I can find this real quick. You had 49.8% of the population vote for Donald Trump, and you had 48.3% vote for Kamala Harris. 75 million votes for Kamala Harris. 77 million votes for Donald Trump. Do you think those voters are going to send people to Congress? That split is going to send enough people to Congress where we're going to change the status quo in Washington, D.C.? We can't even get a law passed that requires people to show ID when they're voting. And that's a Republican problem, not a Democrat problem right now. There aren't even enough Republicans in our federal legislature and Congress that would agree to term limits. Let alone Democrats are never going to agree to it. This convention of states. I'll go to the homepage here. Conventionofstates.com. And you can do a bunch of research here. I don't see any other way, and this is a pessimistic view. I am completely acknowledging that. I don't see a way short of revival. I'm talking about the religious revival, to have a peaceful resolution to the problem that we have in our country right now. I think as long as our electorate in states like Alaska and states like California, two opposite ends of the spectrum with regard to exercise of power in Congress, California has many delegates, many representatives, 2 senators just like we do, but many representatives. We've got 1. And all of those representatives, our single representative and all of theirs, go to Washington, D.C. with the intent of getting money brought back to their state. And not a single one of them are focused on a balanced budget, saying, yes, we're going to bring money back to the state, but we're only going to bring back as much as we're able to generate with our economy, or as much as we're willing to tax other people for. Begich comes back to Alaska and he says, hey, yeah, I can increase that federal dollars, but it's going to require us to increase taxes. And Alaskans are going to go, you better not. You better not increase our taxes. I think the Californians would likely say the same thing too, or at least a certain percentage of them would. They'd probably say, well, tax the rich people, just like the Democrats in our legislature in the state say. Well, we need that high earners income tax. Tax the rich people. You're always going to have that from the left. But the point that I'm getting at is the majority of people in the state of Alaska, if Begich comes back, or if Senator Sullivan or Murkowski were to come back and say, you know what, we've got this balanced budget amendment, and we can't have more road money coming to the state because there's a constraint on the amount of money that the federal government can spend. So we're not going to see additional dollars. The only way that we can see additional dollars is if we raise the income tax. I mean, logically, and of course, the opposite is also true. You could look at cutting spending in wasteful areas, right? I'm not saying that's not a part of the solution, but it would be just as hard at the federal level to do that as it is at the state level to reduce spending. We've got state positions that are funded, and no one's been hired in them for years, okay? And we can't even get those cut. We can't even get Republicans to cut those. So that's the conversation. where you draw the line in the sand. If government's going to grow and it's going to do more, if it's going to continue to subsidize Alaska, then somebody has to pay more in taxes. That is the conversation that we are avoiding nationwide. Nationwide. We're avoiding it because we just allow the federal government to print money and go into debt. Future generations we get to figure that out somehow, some way. We'll increase the economy and pay it back. I mean, in essence, that's what Trump is saying. He's saying, let's put tariffs in place. We'll charge other countries taxes, and that will have the effect that will have on our local economy is to bring some of the jobs, manufacturing and things like that back into the United States. And we'll start growing our economy here. And a growing economy here generates more revenue through taxation here. And that growing economy helps pay the national debt down. So we'll reduce the national debt with growing economy. The problem is that we continue to increase spending. So you have to increase the economy even more than what is even possible. It's just unrealistic to expect that our economy can grow enough to catch up with our propensity to spend and increase our debt. So the question I've got in regards to a constitutional convention that the states would then have a say in what's going on in Washington, D.C., the state legislatures would have a say. What is the alternative to a constitutional convention? How do you see this problem that we have with this runaway spending and this federal overreach, and how do you see that being fixed in the future? Do you think the next generation is going to just be able to come up with a solution? I think this famous dead guy has it right. I think this is unless you have a Pearl Harbor type event, and I'm not saying a war, I'm saying an event that wakes the public up, right? Pearl Harbor woke us up at World War II. Prior to World War II, the United States population said, we are not getting involved in the war in Europe, talking about the Second World War. We're not getting involved. Germany's moving across Europe. England's calling for help. The United States says, hey, you know what? We do not want to get involved. We just got involved and got finished with World War I. We remember that, and we don't want to do that again. So you fight your own war. We're not getting involved. And then the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and now Americans are pissed off, and they say, okay, fine, now we're getting involved. And now we fought the Japanese on the left coast and fought the Germans on the right coast. It took Pearl Harbor to wake the nation up to the threat that was out there. The Japanese threat was out there. We knew that there was this imperialist nation that was adversarial to America. We knew that Germany posed a threat to the world order as it had been. We're not going to do anything about it. It took Pearl Harbor to force us to address those problems. That's what I mean with regard to this federal problem that we have. And I say federal problem, but it's a state problem. It's our electorate across the nation demanding more and more federal spending in our own jurisdictions, in our own backyards. So what is that event that's going to cause Americans, Alaskans, to look at what's happening with regard to the growth of federal government and the overreach of federal government and this runaway spending at our federal level? What's it going to take? If it's not a constitutional convention, constitutional convention is the way to do it peacefully. Okay. So to reiterate, March 18th, next week, House Judiciary. Let's see if I can get this shared quickly. Oh. It looks like I might have closed it. Let me show you something. Check this out. Okay, this is from the 29th legislature. That's 2015, 2016. Okay. That's why it's gray. It's grayed out, but you can find it. You just search for a different year, right? When you go over to bills, you can scroll down here to past legislature and check the archives. And then you can search by title or by bill number or whatever. And you can find what was passed in the past, what bills were passed in the past. Okay. So this is House Joint Resolution 14. This is the resolution that called for the Constitutional Convention, Counterman Convention. Okay. The sponsor was Representative Hughes. That is the same Representative Hughes that is former Senator Shelley Hughes, now governor candidate Shelley Hughes. Then you had Munoz, Ledoux, Stutes, Millett, Lynn, Keller, Tilton, now Senator Tilton, Johnson, Wilson, Culver, Senator Stoltz, Senator Dunleavy, Senators Kelly, McGuire, Coghill, and Senator Bishop, now Governor candidate Bishop. Those were all sponsors of this piece of legislation. So you want to know who voted for it? So it originated in the House. See all the H's here? Then you come down here and you find the vote where it happened. Out of committee, read the second time, we're looking for read the third time, and here's the vote. 24 yay, 15 nay. Click on this link right here, and it takes you to the House Journal. Scroll down, it says House Joint Resolution 14, State Affairs. There being no objection is so ordered. And it was read for the third time. Shall it pass the House? And here's your yays and your nays from 2016. My Representative Chenault, Culver, Foster, Gaddis, Herron, Hughes, Shelley Hughes, Johnson, Keller, Ledoux, Lynn, Millett, Munoz, Nagiak, Newman, Olson, Ortiz, Pruitt, Sadler, Stutes, Tallarico, Thompson, Tilton, Vasquez, and Wilson all voted for it. Clayman, now Senator Clayman, voted against it. Edgman, Speaker Edgman, voted against it. Drummond is no longer in the House, but I served with her. Guerra, Gutenberg, Josephson is still in the House. Kawasaki is now Senator Kawasaki. Keto, Christ Tompkins running for governor. Senator Reinbold voted against it. Paul Seaton from Homer, Sponholz, Tarr, Tuck, Wool, all voted against it. So who from that time frame is still in the legislature? Foster's still in the House. Sadler is back in the House. Stutes is in the House. Depending on which Johnson that is, if that's Delana Johnson, she's still in the House. Clayman is in the Senate now. This is a House vote. Edgman is still in the House. Josephson is still in the House. Kawasaki's now in the Senate. One, two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Maybe 9 members of the House are still in the legislature. Quickly. So now we're into the Senate here. See the S? There's a passed third time. There's Joint Resolution 14. Senator Bishop, Coghill, Costello. She's still, she's back in the House. She was a senator at the time that she voted for it. Now she's a House member. Dunleavy, Giesel voted for it that time. I wonder if she'd vote to. If she stays to form, she's going to vote against it this time. So Bishop's not there anymore. Costello's still in the legislature. Giesel's still in the legislature. Hoffman's still in the legislature. This is Kevin Meyer. We now have a Myers, but it's the other different one. Machicki's no longer there. Olson's still there. Stevens still there. Stoltz is gone. Egan, Ellis, Gardner, Stedman, and Wilikowski are both still there. That's to say, in my estimation, it's a toss-up whether, Giesel, I don't think she'd vote for it again. She's changed her stripes. She'd probably vote for it this time because it's repealing it. Anyway, so this is to say, I'm not confident that this legislature is going to be able to defeat that. You've got a left-leaning Senate and a left-leaning House in charge. I don't know whether they can defeat it. All it takes is a vote, a simple majority vote from both houses, and they've repealed that request for a constitutional Article 5 convention. All right, so your opportunity to influence that is in the House Judiciary meeting next Thursday, the 18th at 1. They will be taking public testimony. Lisa, you ask a really good question. And it is important that you research this on your own. Go to the Constitutional Convention website that I talked about and look for yourself. Conventionofstates.com. I know that that's the logical question, is to ask what's the pros and the cons, and then figure out where you stand on this. But I would say, look at the pros, look at the cons, and then ask, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? If you don't do a constitutional convention, how do you get term limits? How do you get a balanced budget? Those things would drastically impact the way the legislature, way Congress works. It would move us in a better direction. Both of those things. This website that I'm looking at here that I showed you earlier has got a perfect example, or it's got a perfect site here to be able to explain what a convention is here. So you can, and obviously this is going to be the pro side of it, right? So you can go find somebody that'll tell you, oh, look at here. Look at the map I just stumbled on. So these are the states in green here that have passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention. And then the yellow is passed in one chamber of their legislature. It's funny. That's funny to me. I can't see anybody else laughing, but anyway, I think it is an important conversation to say pros and cons, but I think it is at least equally important, if not more important, to ask what's the alternative. Because it might be that the cons here, with your own personality and tolerance for fear and risk, might say, you know what, I'm gonna err on the side of caution, and we're gonna not do it. But then the next question is, what's the alternative? If we don't attempt something bold and brave and risky, what's the alternative? I don't see anything changing. Now, Trump has been an anomaly. Trump's been an anomaly. Much of what he's done can be undone by the next president. If he's doing anything that he's doing by executive order, and his administrators are doing things administratively, all that can be undone when he leaves. We got benefit of Trump for 4 years, but we might have 8 years of Obama number 2 or Biden number 2. Heaven forbid we have Kamala Harris in after Trump. What's the alternative? Lisa says, was reading different things already just makes you wonder if the power went to the state legislature, what would happen then? Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what you're meaning there, but the Constitutional Convention would propose and ratify proposed amendments. And then those amendments, before they became law, before they actually modified our Constitution, they would have to go out to the states, and each one of the legislatures of the states would have to take them up, just like we're taking up bills and resolutions now. And they would debate it through the political process in the legislature. And if they didn't ratify it, they didn't pass it, then, and there's enough of the legislatures that didn't pass it, then it wouldn't become in the Constitution. It wouldn't amend the Constitution. So the legislatures, enough of them, and I think it's 38, still have to agree to whatever comes out of the Constitutional Convention. Craig says, you are not the fence tonight. I'm not the fence, not on the fence. I'm afraid it's late and I don't understand what you mean. Well, I married a good woman. Bold, brave, and risky formed our country. You're exactly right, hon. Craig says the left is far better at political manipulation. We would lose. That is a possibility, but I would argue that we're already losing. If we do not do something with regard to our spending appetite in this country, we are going to run the country into bankruptcy. What is the size of the federal budget? Anybody know off the top of your head? I know I've asked this question before. I want to say it was 4 trillion, but it's probably not. So I just did a quick 7 trillion. Congressional Budget Office estimates and reviews confirming outlays around 7 trillion for 2025. Okay. Federal budget is $7 trillion. We're adding $1 trillion of that 7 trillion. We're adding $1 trillion to debt every year. And another 1 trillion is the minimum payment that we have to pay on the $38 trillion or whatever it is now of debt. It's unsustainable. Thanks, Lisa. Grok got me 7 trillion. If it's 7.1, then that's whatever. What's $1 billion amongst people, amongst friends? We're approaching the time, if we do not do something, we're approaching the time where our federal government fails like other states, other nation states have failed financially. This quote that I put up is not it's not wrong. It seems far-fetched for us. We can argue that we're not a democracy, we're a republic, and so it doesn't apply to us, but that would be wrong. You could make the argument that says putting term limits in place doesn't help us any. Putting a balanced budget amendment would, to a certain extent. The people, Americans, are rewarding their legislators, their congressmen, with additional terms in service for bringing them federal dollars. Look how high we hold our former legislators, federal delegation in high regard for all of the money they brought Alaska. Ted Stevens, Don Young. They got airports and ports named after them because of all the money they brought to the state of Alaska. If we don't have a constitutional convention that puts a balanced budget amendment in place and forces the people to demand higher taxes in order to pay for spending for this current year, the people are going to continue to allow future generations to have to pay for our current year's spending. Congress is not going to pass a balanced budget amendment. There's no universe that exists where that happens. So if you don't have a constitutional convention, you don't have an alternative to the status quo. A peaceful alternative. Let me qualify that. You don't have a peaceful alternative. The status quo runs us off the cliff. That's what happens. Status quo runs us off the cliff. We either default on our debt at some point in time, or we get taxes raised on us in order to pay for debt, and it tanks our economy, and life gets very difficult. Or both. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. Both of them could happen. I don't know what the alternative is. I'm willing to have a conversation about it. Like, somebody prove me wrong, please. Like, anyway. All right. That's going to wrap it for a show tonight. Yeah, Lynn. They brought home the bacon, didn't they? We rewarded them with it. We said it was okay. And not only us, but 49 other states did the same thing for their legislators. And now we're at where we're at. So you're literally asking the people, without having some kind of Pearl Harbor event, you're asking us, you're expecting, without a constitutional convention, you're expecting a majority of the population to stop doing what they've been doing. $75 million people voted for Kamala Harris. That's what did I say that was? 48% of the vote. Trump got 49.8. Like, it's close. Half the voting population, just under half the voting population, is never going to say no to the current level of spending. There's a part of that Trump vote that won't say no either. So there's well over half the population of the country that is not willing to do with less federal spending. So you tell me, without a constitutional convention or some other non-peaceful means, how we're going to slow this train down. There's no way. There isn't a way. Let me qualify that and say There's always a way with our Lord and Savior. We could have a revival in this country and people could start doing the moral thing, right? This is a moral problem that we have. The propensity to saddle future generations, saddle our kids and our grandkids with higher levels of taxation to pay the debt down that we're running up right now. That is morally repugnant to me. And all it would take would be a revival where Americans start looking at the morality of the things that they're allowing to happen in their lives and say, oh, wait. This next election, we got to send somebody to Congress who is not going to spend more. Matter of fact, do not bring home the bacon. Bring home carrots or something that's less costly than bacon. We don't want bacon. Yeah. Americans need a diet, and we're not good at diets. All right, folks. I am going to call it an evening. Thanks for joining me and participating. Appreciate it. Hope this is helpful, and I hope you choose to chime in with the House Judiciary Committee next on the 18th. It'll be important. All right. Have a good night. Hey, also, if you're listening to this, little self-promotion, hit the subscribe button. Help us grow. Appreciate it.